All right. California Senate passed a resolution telling Christian clergy to accept and support LGBTQ ideology, even if doing so violates their Christian beliefs. All right, folks. What in the world are they talking about that stuff for anyway? That's not their business. And why are they in our business? I think the thing for me, I'm not, the hard thing about this is I don't want to sound like an activist up here. I'm not. I am actually a Christian pastor who wants to see the gospel reach people's lives. But one of the ways the gospel has to reach people's lives is also by us advocating for God's ordering of society, because God's ordering of society kind of puts us in a sense where we start to say, well, I don't seem to live up to that, or that view of honor your father and your mother. Oh, I haven't always done that. And so there's a sense where even God's ordering of society starts to drive down into my heart the law, which actually either does one of two things. It actually brings me to repentance, or what does it do? It brings me to arrogance, because it doesn't leave you unscathed. We teach law and gospel. They're both God's word, and they both work. You see, the law of God is not something you just share out there and it just lays. It does things to people. It actually brings people to repentance. Jesus, when he came among people, he said, "Be holy as your heavenly Father is holy." He talked about, he talked about the marriage bed. He talked about, how God ordered the world, male and female. He talked about all that stuff. He talked about divorce. I've preached on divorce and remarriage in church and talked about how there's no such thing as an unforgivable sin, but man, we got to take our sins seriously. And all those kinds of things. Remember when Jesus says, if you lust after a woman, you commit adultery. Oh my gosh, and we're all guilty. Now what? Those are the kind of things. But now even just basic ordering of society where there's this outward obedience to law, it does begin to work on us and say, this can't be what it's all about. There's got to be something better than this. So even as you contend for the things of God to the best of your ability in the moral ordering of the world, it has a purpose. It has a purpose of like God preserving the world, but also God beginning to say, wait a minute, there's got to be a better world than this. And that's all we're talking about. So even engaging this stuff, and it's hard. Some of the stuff's going to be very hard. And we don't want to be arrogant. We don't want to be activists. We just want to be humble servants of God as broken people who are forgiven, who also know that God the Father is preserving the world even as he saves the world by sending his Son. We're going to differentiate those ways of engaging people, but we want to be faithful in both arenas. And so if you hear that passion, it's the passion of being a pastor. Because ultimately, I want people to know about Jesus Christ. And I also want my culture to be as civil, as humane, and as free as we possibly can be. Okay? All right, so today we're going to talk about set free to live freely. That's who you are. That phrase, set free to live freely. It's time to engage the culture for the sake of the mission of the church. The Bible calls us to give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's, and to submit to authorities, as Pastor was pointing out yesterday in his discussion of Romans 13 and what that all means. So we need to know why. We need to know how, especially in a context, and here comes the uniqueness. I didn't talk about this a lot yesterday, I should have. Especially in a context that calls us citizens and not subjects. Okay? Remember, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. In Jesus' days, Caesar was up here, and you were down here. And even the Apostle Paul used his citizenship in Acts chapter 16. Remember when they beat him up? And they said, you should quit preaching and teaching that, so they gave him a good licking. And then they found out, oh, no, he is a Roman citizen. Oh, no. Well, we got to honor that. See, that really helped. And then he said, they told him, hey, if you just go and leave and get out of here, everything will be okay. And he said, no, I demand that you honor my citizenship, and I want to have a say, for what you did to me. And eventually that got him all the way to talk to Caesar. And what did he tell Caesar about? Jesus. Now, he put his citizenship to work. Well, in that day, you were a subject to Caesar. What's different today? The founding fathers turned that whole thing upside down and made the individual citizens Caesars. who then elected their officials, who then told them and kind of limited their power and authority, and then they even got limited more in the tripartite government. So that's the wisdom that finally put all this stuff to work in our context. But you better take your citizenship seriously then. Because it's about engaging, it's about trying to persuade, it's about being out there as God's people for the sake of the culture as well as for the sake of the church. It's time to exercise our temporal liberties in service to God's eternal liberty, the gospel of Jesus, so that all might hear and believe. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And again, remember that grid of engagement yesterday? Most of the time we do this by indirect and unintentional, just being God's people for the sake of our neighbor. And voting when we're called to vote, and then just being about our business where we're called to be about our business. In fact, the hard thing about talking this with Christians is most Christians get political when? November. Why? Because that's when you got to vote. And what do we do the rest of the time? We get back to loving our families, working hard, going to church, and being neighbors to each other. Well, that, I think, is the spirit of our culture. But there are some people who are political all the time. And they're starting to do things to us now that we got to go, well, maybe I got to get more involved in that because we can't let them win there because then I can't talk about Jesus here. And so that's kind of where we're at. And when you have an assemblyman saying that and saying, and you better, that's exactly the opposite of the spirit of the First Amendment. Okay? All right, so today, again, we're going to talk about this. Please know our website is lcrlfreedom.org, lcrlfreedom.org. We've got the one thing I would like you to do, if you've got a smartphone, this is your only assignment today. Smartphone, if you have it. If you still got a flip phone, I don't know what to do with you. My dad still has a flip phone, okay? And he swears, they make him pay for that one. The other ones he can get free. Anyway. Text, and when you text something, it's like you got to type in the phone number, right? Well, the phone number is 444-999. Real easy. 444-999. So 3 4s, 3 9s. That's the phone number. And what you put in the message is LCRL. That's it. So if you were texting me to my phone number, you could say, hi, Greg, or you could just say LCRL. So in this case, to 444-999, you just type the letters LCRL. And when you hit send, it'll come up and say, do you want to be on the email list? And the answer, yes. And then they'll say, well, give me your email. And then you'll give them your email, and then give us your name because we want to make sure this is you. And then once you do that, every Monday in your email box, you'll get a devotion from me. And every Friday, you'll get an op-ed, an opinion piece that's dealing with a lot of these issues, but from our two-kingdom perspective. And you'll be able to start saying, well, we think about that a little differently than other folks. And you'll be able to start to see how and why. Okay? And it's just meant to keep instructing you as God's people. And I'm, like I said, very seldom am I going to warn you about this or that. But occasionally, if we have some guy standing up like this and saying Christians are going to have to start, violating their conscience, well, I'll make sure you know about that stuff too. But again, the whole goal of this is we want to be active in the public square for the sake of our culture. Our culture needs Christians to stand up and say, no, there's virtues that we need to try to live up to. Because our culture, is based on these virtues, and we want those things to be foundational to what it means to be civil human beings and neighbors. But I still want to tell you about Jesus, because your eternal life is what matters to me, okay? All right. And by the way, if you do want a self-addressed envelope, I've got a bunch of them over here still. Some have been asking for that, and they're up here and they're over there. Please take us, and if you want to give them away to people, please take them. I don't want to take them back. I can always print up new labels. All right, here's our main verse for the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty. Tell me if you like this verse. I actually wanted Galatians 5:1. It is for freedom that you have been set free. So you've been set free because ultimate freedom is something between you and God, right? And you don't have it as sinners. So God had to do what? He had to come and live your life and die your death and give you his life. He had to set you free from the bondage of sin, death, and the devil. And he did that in Jesus, right? So you've been set free to live what? Freely. And so that's Galatians 5, but I actually like, we finally chose this verse because it starts to define what that kind of free way of living is all about. Here it goes. This is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as, so again, this is not so much a command, it's just a reality. Just be about the business of living. Anybody got a problem with that? Who wants to stop living today? Raise your hands. Okay, good. It's kind of the same thing when we talk about Matthew 28. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. Everyone says, see, there's the command to go. No, actually, it's while you're going. It's a participle. It's not it's God assumes you're going to be about the business of living. So while you're living, while you're going, here, be about this. Focus on that. When people come into your life, be ready to do this with them and to love them the way I love you. So he assumes you're going to live. Same thing here. Live as people who are free. So please understand, if our government was to become tyrannical overnight, who knows? Because all governments finally seem to implode on something. But if it was to do that, would we cease to be free people? No, we are free people because of who Jesus is. And the government cannot take that away from us. No culture can take that away from us. And we can live as free people in any culture of the world. Right? I just happen to enjoy the fact that we have temporal freedoms here that allow that to be something we can do more freely. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's worth defending the freedoms we have in America. Because it allows us to be more freely Christian for other people. Whether we've lived up to that freedom or not, that's a whole nother discussion. But I'm saying go for it. Just live. Don't be thwarted by any of this stuff. No matter what's happening, don't worry as much as find a way to engage. So live as people who are free. But don't use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. That's a whole discussion that we could have about it. Romans 6, living in such a way that we kind of hide who we are. No, learn how to be who you are. And even as you try to defend God's ordering of the world, people are going to say, you're a broken person just like me. And the answer is, yes, of course. Lutherans teach that we're 100% sinners and what? 100% saints. So you can tell me anything you're doing and I can say, well, I don't maybe have that sin, but I sure understand why you got the compulsion like me, because we're 100% sinners like you are. We just have a Savior. We also have a God who orders sinners so that they don't destroy themselves. Because the worst case scenario in our world today is the chaos of absolute freedom of absolute sinners who are absolutely unbound by anything. G.K. Chesterton said this. He said, as I became more Christian, now he was one of those secular guys in England. There's C.S. Lewis, you know that name probably. I think you should read G.K. Chesterton. I really love him. He's a character. And he said one time, he became a Christian later in life and then became a real defender of the church in kind of secular England. He said, as I became a Christian, I began to realize that there are all these boundaries that I started running into that I never ran into before. But then I realized why. He said, because when those boundaries are put in place, he said, freedom runs wild in a beautiful way. When those boundaries aren't in place, the chaos that occurs has us all in the bondage of sin running wild. And so it's kind of like if there's no boundary right here and I just walk off the stage, but if the boundary's here, boom, then I can start dancing up here. And I don't have to worry about that. And that's how he understood. So he said, again, that's how you should represent God's ordering of the world. Not like, oh my gosh, now I don't have any freedom here. No, you suddenly have freedom you never knew you had, and it runs wild. And so again, that's how we understand. So live as people who are free. So here it comes. How do we do that? We're servants of God. We're trying to honor God, how he engages the world two different ways to preserve and to save. Honor everyone. What kind of word is honor? It's a respect word. So there's a sense where even when I come up on Capitol Hill, I try to honor the people that I'm dealing with. And you run into people who disagree with you vehemently. So the first thing I want to do is I want to try to disassociate. I honor them as people even though I might disagree with them in this particular perspective. And I think Christians by and large still practice that. One of the reasons why we lose a lot of arguments is because we're practicing that, and the other side is just coming at us all different kinds of ways. It's kind of like boxing, and you box by the rules, and then the other person doesn't use any of the rules. Well, I don't know. That's the whole discussion of civility, incivility, and all these kind of things, and we could talk about that. I do think we need a more civil world, but boy, if that's the case, then I'd like to see Netflix cleaned up. I'd like to see Hulu cleaned up. Because if you watch some of that stuff, I don't know how you can remain a civil human being. But honor everyone, that sense of respect. And by the way, I'll give you an example of why if you don't do this, you're going to really be an embarrassment to God and actually get in his way. Pro-life movement now is generally identified with one party. Would you agree with that? But do you know there's 20 million pro-life Democrats? I bet you didn't know that. And if I would have assumed, and then by the way, the Republican Party's not always been the greatest defender of it, and they say when they want your vote, they'll tell you what they stand for, but when you need them to stand up for it, a lot of them stand down just like everybody else. But my point is, I ran into this gal, she's a Democrat, and so again, that's the issue between, workers' rights and corporate rights, and that's how they're still Democrats that way, blue-collar Democrats, and yet, but they're very vehemently pro-life. And I said, man, we're on your side. We're with you on this pro-life thing. I can have a discussion about economics all day long, but that's not going to divide me from you. And so when you look at these kinds of things and you say, wow, if I would have been a person who dishonored her, I would have never known some of the beauty of the beneficial connections we had. And so we've been working very hard with her organization on the Hill to see how we might bring some of that back even to the Democratic Party. Wouldn't that be lovely? But here's what's happening, just to let you know. Again, you talk about civility. There's a guy named Cuellar. He's in Texas. I try to, people always say, you got to go visit more Democrats, and I'm trying. But they don't want to get their picture taken with me. So I send my wife. She's a lot prettier, and I was hoping that, and she's Hispanic, by the way. But so we're doing all this kind of nonsense. But my point is, Cuellar. My wife has family who are Cuellar, so we wanted to go see Cuellar. He's a pro-life Democrat. He's a really big pro-life Democrat in Texas. But do you know what Nancy Pelosi is doing to Cuellar right now? There's a bill they're trying to bring to the floor called the Born Alive bill. Have you heard about this bill? So they're basically saying if a baby is born alive, you cannot kill it. What kind of society kills babies born alive that are crying on the table? Not a humane society. So anyway, that's that. So they want to put this bill up and bring it up for vote so that people can be counted. And Cuellar has been put on the committee, and he's a pro-life Democrat. Very, very staunch. He's been put on the committee that's sole goal is to make sure that legislation never sees the light of day. Now, why did she put him on the committee? And then why did she make him the chairman of that committee? And why does she make him gavel no to something that in his heart he knows for sure he's for? It's to humiliate him. And if he does buck it, then they'll have people run against him in his arena in Texas. And so he's towing the line. He's doing what he's told as a pro-life Democrat, even though it violates his conscience every time he knocks that gavel down. Now, is that a nice person? See, that's my point. So this civility thing, if we're going to get into real civility, let's talk. I wish our president didn't use profane language. I'm with you on that. I mean, I'm with you, like I said before, but I didn't elect him as my pastor, but I do wish I wish he would talk forcefully about these things without going over the edge. But he's a New Yorker. Have you ever heard New Yorkers talk? To some degree, if you sound too nice, they actually don't listen to you. Honor everyone. Anybody got a problem with that? So if you're going to live as a free person, here's how Peter says live. Love the brotherhood. Notice the difference now. Love is a different word. I don't necessarily love the people I'm engaging in the sense that I don't love what they're about. I don't love what they're standing for. I sure don't love, I just read an article this morning that they're trying to resurrect Margaret Sanger and they're trying to redo her whole image because they want to teach that she was a wonderful person. Margaret Sanger was the head of Planned Parenthood. She's the one that created it, and the original goal of Planned Parenthood was to wipe out African Americans and was to wipe out the poor so that we could have a society of eugenics was to create the perfect human beings because we thought genetically now we could do that. Hitler thought that, Sanger thought that, and a lot of people thought that. We said, wait a minute, you're created in the image of God. We don't mess with human beings like that. Those are the two worldviews that are hitting each other. They're trying to resurrect and recast her whole history. But again, I don't need to love that, but I'm still going to respect that person and when I engage them, because who knows, they could turn and become a person who says, wow, I believe in the dignity of humanity too. Love the brotherhood. So I do agree that if the church is going to be a significant force in the world, politics is not where we're going to be ultimately heard. We got to do some of this political stuff to just push back, but where we're going to make our mark is how we love each other. And we got a lot of work to do there. I know that. And we're broken sinners, and we act like families, sometimes who are at odds with each other. We're going to have to learn how to forgive as we have been forgiven and to love as we have been loved. And I know that's not an easy thing to do. By the way, I'll tell you, the church is the most unique organization in the whole world, because you come to church. Well, why do you go to church? Why do you go to church? Hear about Christ? Okay. Sacramental certainty, yeah. Evangelistic risk, yeah. Okay. Here, I'm going to tell you, see, I try to bring it down to you go to church to learn how to love people you don't like. That's what makes the church radically unique, because you hear the love of God that comes to people that He didn't like us as sinners, and yet He loved us enough to actually redeem us and restore us to Himself. And so now we as people get to come to church and receive this incredible love we did not deserve or earn, and then we turn and, there's the person I get to love in the same way I've been loved. So I'm going to love that person, but I don't really like them. And so that's the power of the church. Every other organization, you join it because you like the people. And if you don't like them, you leave. Jesus says you better stay and you better learn to love as I have loved you. And by the way, the Lutherans even have a more powerful way of talking about that, because when we go to the Lord's Supper and we receive the real presence of Christ in word and sacrament, body and blood, and then we turn from the supper to leave, where is the Jesus that I get to love? He's right there. In that person, and that person, and that. Real presence here, real presence there, real presence there. There goes Jesus. Go love them. But I don't like that person. That's Jesus. Learn to love them the way you are loved. What a compelling message, right? So let's be the church. Love the brotherhood. And every day you confess this. You say, I believe in the holy Christian church, the communion of saints. What you just said there is, I believe in you even though I don't know you yet. I believe in you because Christ already loves you. And therefore, I'm going to try to honor what Christ has already done in your life by learning how to love you. And the first thing I'm going to say is, I believe in you first. You might find out all kinds of reasons not to believe in me, but hang in there, because Jesus still loves me, and that's the main reason to believe in me, because Christ loves me. And if Christ loves me and loves you, we can form a brotherhood that you cannot break apart. And our world needs that, but they're not going to get that through any government program. Anybody disagree with that? Okay, good. I just want to make sure we understand each other. So honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, and that's ultimate respect for God, not terrify, but ultimate respect for God, because God is the one doing all this. He's the one who engages a sinful world to preserve it as well as to save it. And like I said, He preserves it through that conscience that He builds into us. We see that conscience most manifest in the Ten Commandments, but we can actually kind of trust that conscience stuff is in the hearts of everybody. So in other cultures, we see reflections of the Ten Commandments all throughout their culture. We see it because it's in here first. But the law doesn't save, does it? No, the law curbs us, but ultimately the law brings us to a point of ultimate, Lord, repentance and sorrow for our sin. But that's all God's work. It's through His law. Fear God, and then honor the emperor. Again, for Peter to write that at that moment in time is an amazing thing to say, because the emperor was not the Christian's friend. But he says, but God is still doing something that He needs done for sinners, and He's doing it through the emperor. He's not saving the world through the emperor, but He is preventing ultimate chaos through government and public things, vocations like moms and dads and all those things. Okay, so I just want you to see how God is at work. And this is our main verse. This is how we get to start living freely. All right, so it's easy to be brave from a distance. Would you agree with that? Yeah, that's the hawk. That was a hawk. I took a picture of the hawk one time in my backyard in California. Eventually, that hawk actually swooped down and tried to kill my dog. We had one of those little tiny dogs. I grew up with Labradors. Now that I'm married, all my dogs are this big. And I've never seen the G-forces. It just boom, boom, and just plucked it, and just obviously too heavy. I found out later that that's exactly what it was, because my dog came in and had the little spear mark in it. But it's easy to be that. We're not hawks. Where are we? We're down in the middle of all this. And that's why to be a two-kingdom person, yeah, we have to differentiate and keep some of these things separate in our minds, but we are still living singular lives in the middle of all this ruckus. We just want to make sure that when God wants us to do a preserving work, we're doing that kind of preserving work. When He wants us to share the gospel, do a saving work, we do a saving work, and He tells us methodologies of how to do both of those things. Let's learn how to do it. All right, so challenges and opportunities. Basically, defense of liberty, protecting the church's public voice, for the sake of the culture and for the sake of the gospel. That's the only reason I'm in D.C. I'm not there to drain the swamp. I'm not there to... By the way, there are some people who believe, and this is what I think Pastor was talking about yesterday, I would say, yes, we're a Christian nation insofar as we're all, generally speaking, the people that were here before were incorrigibly Christian. Did I say that? Did you hear what I just said? Incorrigibly Christian. But our founding fathers never wanted the federal government to be a Christian government. Would you agree with that? Yeah, but that's because they limited the government to very specific things. And they really wanted the government to be bound so that you as individuals, and most of the people of those days were some form of Christian. And they wanted them to be set free to live their lives freely, self-disciplined, moral lives. I would say a lot of our founding fathers were moralists for sure. Now, whether they're the kind of Christian we think understands the gospel, that's a good discussion. And I don't have a problem with that. But the Judeo-Christian ethic, the biblical ethics of the principles of, say, the Ten Commandments that are in our conscience, no, they would have all argued for that. Even Jefferson would have argued for that. He just didn't like the resurrection and all that kind of stuff. He loved the moral teachings of Jesus. So again, as we look at this, what I'm just saying is, I just want the church to be able to be a public church, especially when it comes to moral issues with the culture. And then, of course, we should be free to preach the gospel. And we don't want the state preaching the gospel whatsoever, but the state and the church are both moral institutions. And that's where we do run into these guys. Because I know for a fact our founding fathers did not want an amoral government. And they sure didn't want an immoral government. They wanted a virtuous government. Right? And so when we see amorality, immorality, and non-virtue, we can't even teach virtues in school today. That's crazy. Do you remember Bill Bennett? Do you guys remember that guy, Bill Bennett? The Book of Virtues? I was kind of like, okay, as long as we teach the 7 virtues in school, I'm okay with that. I don't want them preaching Jesus in school, because who knows what kind of Jesus they'll preach. By the way, they do preach Jesus in these schools. Just not the kind you and I know about from the Scripture. There is a show coming out called Bless Your Heart, and Jesus is in it. And he's just kind of a hipster guy that comes around and is hanging loose and everything. I just saw the promo, and I thought, what in the world is this? This is what, our kids are going to learn a form of Jesus. Don't get me wrong, and they'll get it. They're just not going to get the one you preach in church. So I'm okay with saying they don't have any business preaching Jesus. But the virtues, the values necessary to a humane culture, I think that's their role as educators, okay, is to form a virtuous people who can then hold freedom in their and actually practice free lives. So we're going to be a defender of the church's public space for this, and that's where even the Apostle Paul's work in Acts 16, when he says, hey, I'm a Roman citizen, and you don't have the right to do that. And he uses his citizenship at that point to bolster his work of the gospel. We've got First Amendment rights. Use those rights, because you're going to need them. Now, again, let's say you win the battle of First Amendment rights, you still got to be at the church and love people into the kingdom of God. A deterrent to state encroachment and cultural decay. I think that's where we're being pushed into the corner. We're being told that any engagement as Christians, any engagement means we're somehow suspect and to be disregarded. I'll give you an example. We had a thing called the intersection of church and state. I don't know if you saw that. Luther and I put that on. I and another guy wrote that actually overnight. because the original drafts of that were written by a couple guys who didn't know anything about constitutional law. And so we rewrote the whole kind of bridge stuff overnight, and we tried to get that out. We went to Discover Channel. It was a historical piece. It was well grounded in history. We had footnoted everything, and we could demonstrate that this is how these things were put together and fashioned and what the implications were. And we tried to get it on Discovery Channel, the History Channel, and every one of them said, "Who are you?" "We're the Lutheran Hour Ministries." "Nope. Don't want anything to do with it." It was better than anything that Discovery Channel had on at the time. Couldn't get on. Finally got it on Fox Business. But how in the world is something that is a historical document? I mean, Oswald Hoffman did something called Yeshua, and it was a historical look back on how the church kind of grew, and those kind of things were totally fine to be put on cultural, platforms. How come we can't do this anymore? The state seems to be in everything, and so, as I said, our founding fathers may have said, okay, that part can be kind of like, we don't want that to be influencing religious teaching because it's so narrow and so particular. It doesn't, what's the right word? If you said your only job as a federal government is to fill potholes, and that's all you're supposed to do, would you have to be Christian to fill a pothole? No, we just want you to fill the pothole right. And in some sense, that's how they understood the federal government. We have very specific things we want it to do, and to that degree, we're not going to entangle religion and the federal government in this particular area. And that's the First Amendment. Yes, I'm with that all the way. But they really believed that the Christianly motivated people of God out there loving and serving each other, that was going to be the best way to maintain liberty. But the problem now is that government has been flipped upside down, and it's in everything. And it's not just in legislation. It's in these agencies that create these regulatory rules that can put you out of business and no one even knows you're gone. And that's one of the other things, too, where we have unelected bureaucracies that control our lives. And the Founding Fathers would have been totally shocked by that nonsense. They really would have. And so again, we just want to be a deterrent. All we want to do is push back on those areas so that we can still be the church. And when someone starts telling us this is what you're going to say in your churches, man, they've overstepped their boundaries. And empowering those who live public lives. So the other thing is, I'm not a politician, I am not a lobbyist, and I am not a lawyer. So I don't go to D.C. for that reason. I go to D.C. to also encourage those who would love the church's prayers, they would love the church's support. They would love someone that can just be with them and listen and counsel. And so I go there to do that for those on the Hill who request my services, especially the Lutheran folks. And they need it because they really need to know that you're praying for them and that you care about them. So we have a cultural mandate. We're called to engage the culture. That's all I'm saying, engage it for the sake of the gospel. So we exist to do this work with you, and we want to learn together because some of this stuff is things we haven't done for a while, but we want to be an advocate. But again, if we're going to be an advocate together, not just individually, but an advocate together, remember that grid yesterday that I told you about? We're really uncomfortable at the church when we start talking about direct and intentional. We're really uncomfortable with that. Why? Because if you start legislating the Bible in a way that says, this is for all of you people. There's a lot of people who are going to chafe at that and say, we don't know what this Bible is. And suddenly they think of the Bible as this hammer that's really trying to hammer them into, a square peg into a round hole. Well, that's not the gospel. The gospel is all about a God who serves, who comes into our life and serves. And the Bible is a record of that. So when it comes to these direct and intentional things, there's only a couple of them that we really are fighting for because we don't want to confuse the Bible's message with some political utopia. Do you know there are some people who believe that politics will save us? They really believe that. We don't. Politics is, as well as all these things that we're talking about, is the basement floor of life, and we need to put a basement floor in with our fellow citizens, some of which will be believers, some of them now are non-believers, some of them are believers in all kinds of other things. Still got to put a basement floor in of society. So when I talk to my neighbors who are Persians, I said, do you value your children's life? Yes. Do you want your children to be well educated? Yes. Do you think that there's a moral structure to life? Yes. We're all saying yes to all kinds of stuff. Then we need to codify this so that we have a civil society and we have an educational system that honors some of those things. And so again, should we do this together? Yes. Now, is that the gospel? No. But is that the way you should treat your neighbor just basically? That's honor your neighbor, even if you don't agree with them. Should we be involved in those discussions? Yes. Should we be raising our hands and saying, well, here's the way I would see it, and then if they say, well, what do you mean by that? You try to explain it as something that you think will benefit everybody, not just you. And if you learn how to do that, I think you're going to be a real asset in your community. Most Christians come in and say, I'm against it, and it's because I hate what it's doing to the church. Well, if that's the way you are, then you're like everybody else. But if you come in and say, I'm standing here defending this because I think it's the right thing for all of us, and it kind of puts us all in the same boat, and I'm here to stand for that, I think you'll get a hearing. And religious liberty is one of those ways. So we're there to defend, as an advocate, we're there for religious liberty and religious freedom. And that's how Walter Maier defended the First Amendment when he got almost kicked off the air. And he wasn't defending it for Lutheran teaching on the air. He expected that our way of talking about this would cut through all that other noise, and people would say, I like that Jesus most of all. But he didn't want to legislate how we spoke. He just wanted to say each one of us should have the freedom to be on this radio. My biggest problem with Google and Facebook today is that they're starting to edit content. That'd be like Ma Bell, because they're treated. See, when we get involved in some of these issues, I basically say if they're being treated like a utility, which is what they are, they have tax breaks and all kinds of things. They're being treated like Ma Bell, Southwestern Bell. Now, does Southwestern Bell shut your phone off when they hear something on the phone line that you're not supposed to be talking about? No. Now, the New York Times and newspapers edit, right? And so we have all kinds of newspapers now out there, saying things, and you have to sift through to see which one is really getting the facts out to you. But when Facebook and Google are being treated like utilities, but they're acting like newspapers, we got a problem. If you don't believe me on this, there's a guy named Epstein. He's from Harvard. He's a sociologist, Epstein. He is not a conservative. He is a liberal. He admits it. He said, I don't really believe in a lot of the same perspectives. He said, but one thing I believe in is religious liberty and the First Amendment. And he's been studying Google. I don't know if he's been studying Facebook, but it's Google especially for several years now. And he says that Google now has algorithms that are actually determining how people think. And there's ways to sway people's opinions. Most people, when you go online and you type in something, the top 3 things that come up, you think that's the truth on the matter, right? Because you think most people are hitting that. That's why it came up first. And if it comes up first, second, and third, you're looking at that going, okay, well, that's the most information I need on this data. That's how most people think. Google now, through its algorithms, can determine, so last election, when they had Hillary Clinton, and you typed in her name, the top 10 things, the whole first page was all positive stuff on Hillary Clinton. It's all positive. The top first page on Donald Trump was all negative. And so you look at that and you say, how did that happen? Algorithmically, they can do that. If it's the Christian pro-life movement, they can have 10 things on that first page that are very derogatory. If it's pro-choice, they can have 10 positive things. And the average person says, well, that pro-life, those must be mean people. And that's generally how they're doing things right now. And one of the things we're fighting, even with this freedom stuff, is to get them to stop doing this kind of nonsensical algorithmic sorting. Okay, let the number one thing that gets hit, let that become number one. Don't push it down just because it's positive or negative, and don't write an algorithm that can sort that stuff out, because that's how editors do things with newspapers. And I've got some newspapers I trust and some newspapers I don't. So again, as you think this stuff through, we're just saying keep certain things open so we can find our own way, because it's our job to be good citizens and we need good information. Okay? So advocate. What's the other one? Sanctity of life. These are the 2 big things. Because sanctity of life, if sanctity of life ever gives way, I don't know what the whole experiment of America is about anyway. It's about life and pro-life and living life. And so again, don't use your freedom to live life to actually nail somebody else. Or, and if you're going to use your sexual freedom, well, don't use it to destroy other people's lives. You know, that's the whole libertinism of the 60s. We're fighting back against that because that's a misuse of their freedoms. And they just don't want to pay any of the consequences for those misuse of freedoms. Pastor, one of the ones you were talking about yesterday with religious liberty with the peyote. You're talking about the guy that they said you can't use peyote? Well, I guess he can now. That's a joke, everybody. Because isn't it legal to do marijuana here? Because that's what peyote is. Well, now I guess you're going to get a new religion here pretty soon. I'm just teasing, but I'm just saying that was one time where they said no, and now that encumbrance is out of the way. But advocate, those are the two big things we advocate, and we don't really get involved any more than that. Why? Because we're not generally direct and intentional people. Because we realize that God, it's a messy business to put a ground floor in, and we're not going to always agree with people, and we're going to have some disagreements, but all we're going to finally say is we need to put a floor in. The only people we absolutely fundamentally don't agree with and must fight against are those who say there's no such thing as a ground floor, that everyone do just whatever you please. Well, we can't live like that. That's chaos. And so religious liberty, sanctity of life, marriage, like we talked about yesterday, to us as Lutherans is a religious liberty issue. I don't know that I want the government defining marriage, and I definitely don't want them defining gay marriage, but they've done that, and now that they've done that, we're in all kinds of moral morass now because now it's a civil right. What the heck? Even marriage wasn't a civil right. Marriage was a contract limiting the rights of men and women. So, like I said, most Lutherans would say, well, get out of the whole business if you can't do it right. And generally speaking, we as Lutherans can adjust to this because you can go get married at the Justice of the Peace, right? And then you can come to the church and be blessed by the marriage. In fact, that's how our hymn books are like that, because there's a place where the marriage that was happened yesterday over at the Justice of the Peace, now they want Christ's blessing, and they stand up in front of the congregation and they receive the blessing of the pastor. And we can adjust to this stuff. Certain things I can't bless, though. And so you start to get involved in all these kinds of issues. We're just pushing back and saying, if you're going to force me to now say that this is the same, or you're going to force me to say this is a civil right when I know it's not a civil right whatsoever, because neither is marriage between a man and a woman, then get out of the whole business. So that's how we generally attack that issue. And then the other one's educational freedom. I'm a big believer that we need an educated electorate. We need an educated people. I think the present structure of how that stuff is going on is abusive, and I think decentralizing it's the best way to actually resolve these things. I don't want the public school writing a prayer for all of us, but neither do I want them teaching a moral structure to the world that offends my conscience and the conscience of my children. So what's the solution to it? I suppose you can fight and see about getting certain kinds of prayer in school, or maybe getting the Bible back in school, or you can decentralize the schools and say everyone has the same money to go get educated because we need an educated electorate. Everyone should have equal access to education, absolutely, but that's where the state's role should end. Because the father and mother's job is to educate their kids, not the bureaucrats or the educational establishment. So again, if you do that, then the kid can go to a school that teaches and honors, and then I would say, let's see who can teach best. And I guarantee you we'll be close, if not better. And we'll have an educated electorate. That's what the founding fathers would have wanted, right? So those are the only things. That's it. Now you might say, well, we should be involved in other things. Well, that's your job as citizens. You got to be careful about saying, thus saith the Lord, as a church as a whole, we must say this, and thus saith you based on your conscience convicted by experience and the Word of God. You guys can have different opinions on a lot of these things and still be faithful Lutheran Christians. But a couple of these fundamentals, we feel we need to fight for those for everybody. And that's why we're now in D.C. We're there to educate. Obviously, I come and talk about these things with church people all over the country. We do have a process of how you can become a champion for liberty. By the way, I don't want you to become a person who leaves this place and says, I'm going to call my congressman incessantly now for the next month. That's not the kind of people I want to produce. What I'd like you to be is the kind of people who are public Christians. So go to the school board, but don't say anything. For the first year, don't say anything. Just pray. Just go there, listen to all the things that are going on, and just pray, pray, pray. Come back, maybe tell your group what's going on, and you guys pray. Go to the police station. Get to know the police. My wife, every city we were at, she took our Girl Scout troop or some of our study groups and went and they got to meet the policemen of the area so that they got to know us and we got to know them because we honored their work and we wanted to undergird it and how could we be helpful. So we became public people, went to the fire station, went to a lot of the public gatherings, didn't say a word. Because that first year, you should just be prayer walking. Listen, listen, listen. And after 1 year of being a public person, doing something publicly once a month like that, as one person or as a group, then report back to me what you learned. Report back to me what you saw. Report back to me how your prayers influenced or opened you up to things that you never thought you never knew were there before, or maybe how it even started solving problems that you didn't do anything else but pray. Once you're that kind of person who's willing to be a public person in service to the community, then I think you can start getting a little bit more involved in some of the particular issues, because I think your heart's already in the right place. But I don't want you to be that activist on Monday, because that's just not that's Reformation restraint means we're going to learn and pray for a whole year before we start to see, well, what do we do next, okay? And everyone should go through that process. So that's what a champion lives. So I'm here to educate you in that. I do have one thing. What time did I start, Pastor? 11:30? Okay, I'll be done in a second here. Got to move quickly then. We do have an educational thing. It's called the Madison Liberty Center. I just told you that's our biggest initiative. If there are any people here who want to support us, that's the big thing. Because we're going to have 300 kids who go through 6 classes of public citizenship, 2 Kingdom citizenship, with an internship in D.C. And they're not going to be the pastors, teachers, DCEs. We train those guys in this too. But the real people that need to learn how to work in the left-hand kingdom are everybody else. And so we're going to train 300. That's our goal, 300 in the next 5 to 7 years of your kids who really know this stuff. And they know how to differentiate this stuff. They know how to stand up, they know how to stand down, and they know how to stand firm. They know all that. And it's always for the sake, ultimately, of the gospel. But they also are willing to engage the culture for that sake, too. And that's our biggest initiative. And we've probably got to raise $250,000 in the next 6 months to do. All we're going to do is we're going to write the curriculum with that money. And that curriculum is going to be an online curriculum that we hope eventually will be at every Concordia, but for now at Concordia, Nebraska. And once that money is spent, we won't have to raise it again. Once it's in the can, then it's easy peasy to keep funding it, because it'll just be the funding from this educational system with tuition and things like that. The Educational Initiative. And it's right up here. It's called the Madison Religious Liberty Center right now, for lack of a better term. And everything you want to know about it's up here, and I'll get you any documentation on it. If we do that, we'll have 15 years worth of work, and we'll have 300 students who know how to talk about this better than I will. Can you imagine? I want that. I hope you do too. I was at a meeting just this last week. There were 4 girls. They were 24 to 26 years old. And they got up and they were talking about some of this stuff. They were the most articulate, persuasive people I have ever met. And I looked around to my wife. I said, our kids should be doing that. They weren't 40-year-olds. They were 24-year-olds and 25-year-olds. They were already capable of handling this stuff. We've kind of gotten to the point now where we expect so little of our kids. These were kids who knew how to do this, and they had been instructed well. I say we can even instruct them better because of our 2 Kingdom stuff. I really think it's that precious. Well, I really want to see our kids up there mixing it up. And I want our pastors to be free to preach the gospel from the pulpit, and some of those kids will be the ones keeping some of this nonsense at bay so that the pastor can do it. All right? All right. And then I told you about, and then the last one was, have you heard, encouraging. And again, that's encouraging those who are already on the hill. We have a meeting coming up called the Lutheran 2 Kingdom Roundtable. We invite congressmen, senators, and aides, and all kinds of other people to that. Most of them are Lutheran. But if you believe in 2 kingdoms, come along. And we've got people from all swaths of denominations who are now really getting into this 2 Kingdom stuff. One of the reasons why, I'll just give you one. Most evangelicals have been taught that God wants to make us a Christian nation. And that's where we disagree with that, right? Because God never promised to do what? To transform the nation. He promises to transform you. Now, if you all get together and become a new community that transforms the neighborhood, well, that's one thing. But I'm saying they have this sense in the evangelical world that law can transform you. That's where they go wrong. It all goes back to Calvin. Calvin actually wanted Geneva to become a Christian city. Well, the only way you can make sure it's absolutely Christian is to do what? Force people to finally be Christian. Well, if you force people to be Christian, you already aren't Christian, right? Because that's the state it forces, the church it serves. The state it compels, the church it serves, right? So the rejectability of the gospel is one of the key things. Christ was rejected. And you could be rejected too. But our founding fathers said, we're going to elevate that and set you free and see. But the last thing they wanted to do is compel you to be a Christian, okay? And so again, as we look at these things, we didn't go to D.C. to transform it. We went to D.C. to make sure we undergirded good moral government so that the chaos would be mitigated the best. The transforming stuff only happens when the gospel changes your heart, okay? And so a lot of evangelicals, because there's been some times we've gotten a lot of good laws passed, right? It seemed like everything was great. We got all the right laws passed, and nobody changed. And we Lutherans came in and said, of course, the law doesn't change. The law only curbs you, and that's why we should have good laws. But the law can only make you sorrow for your sin, or it can only make you arrogant in your sin. It cannot change your heart. Only the gospel can, and the gospel cannot be compelled. So again, as we go there, they go, wow, so you mean the work that we did to get that law in place? I go, that was a great thing, but it was a curb. That's all it was. It was a basement floor. That's all it was. But you did a good job. And they go, because they thought they had failed, because they hadn't transformed D.C. So again, the curbing work to prevent chaos, yeah, absolutely. So get involved. And so we're there to encourage people who are doing that hard work. All right, Walter Meyer, you heard about that? So the question is it necessary? And so I would say, I'm sorry for all the words. I'm going to break this up, but let me just read it to you. This is Robert Reich. Robert Reich served under the Clinton administration. I'm not picking sides here, but he said something that so blew my mind, I had to let you know it. He's teaching, I think, at Cal Berkeley now. Funny, all these guys want him in teaching positions. He said the true battle of the 21st century will be between the modern society and the anti-modernists. Who does he think you are? Good. Between those who believe in the primacy of the individual and those who believe that human beings owe their allegiance and identity to a higher authority. So the Christian worldview, which produced individual liberty from the Christian worldview, he now pits that worldview against individual liberty. I disagree with his statement, but he puts us on two sides. Between those who give priority to life in this world and those who believe that human life is a mere, notice the word mere, preparation for existence beyond life. What did he just say there? You people are so heavenly minded, you're of no earthly good. And to be honest with you, I hate that phrase. Stop it, people, because churches are teaching that. Chuck Colson said his life changed in prison. Colson was Nixon's hatchet man, if you remember. He went to jail for Watergate. In jail, he said he discovered that his life was eternal, and it changed everything. He says, once I knew my life was eternal, then this day really mattered. And what I did today really mattered because it had eternal significance, eternal consequence. And so every day mattered because my life was eternal. If your life is just 90 years and then you're back in the box and it's over, then who cares about what happens today, tomorrow, or forever? So I disagree with his nonsense about that we live for today, but those Christians only live for eternity. But that's how he describes us. Those who believe in science, reason, and logic, yeah, right. The pro-life movement is the most scientific movement in America today because you're a human being from the moment of conception. You don't go through, phylogeny does not recapitulate ontogeny. This nonsense about you went through the fish stage, then you went through the mammal stage, then you went through the human stage, that was all nonsense. It's still taught in some of our science books. Between those who believe. So he says that's him, and then truth is revealed through Scripture and religious dogma. So you can already see how this is being set up. I mean, we're the troglodytes. We're the people, we're the uneducated. We're the people who just don't know. I mean, we shouldn't even be allowed to speak in the modern society because we just aren't moderns. But here's where it gets worse. That's not the greatest danger we face. He said terrorism will disrupt and destroy lives, but terrorism is not the greatest danger we face. You are. Now, I'm asking you, what do you do with something like that? I say you got to engage it. You have to engage it. You have to go verse by verse and start to unpack how the Christian worldview actually has brought liberty even to non-Christians. You've got to start unpacking these statements, because otherwise, this nonsense like Christianity was against science. No, it wasn't. Almost every scientific debate that was happening in the ancient world was happening. There were Christians on both sides of these debates. And faith was compelling many of these scientists early on to take great risks even with their own lives, because they thought it would benefit humanity. So again, this is the view, and all I'm saying is, boy, if you don't engage that view, no wonder kids think that their church is meaningless to them. If they're taught this in school, and then they're taught this in college, and then they're taught this, and then they come back, and then I told you in the latest textbook, they're taught that anything that disagrees with this stuff is spiritual abuse. Bill Nye the Science Guy said, if you teach your children they were created in the image of God, that is spiritual abuse. Bill Nye the Science Guy he's not a scientist. I had one guy who debated this on, he was the head of Washington University's medical school. He's one of their preeminent scientists. He's LCMS, by the way. He says, I do more science in my little finger each day than Bill Nye has ever done in his lifetime. He's just a mouthpiece for a certain view of science. But what a statement to throw out there if you're actually teaching that you're abusing your kids. What if our kids believe that? So again, we need to learn how to talk publicly about moral engagement. We got to deal with the question, how does God engage the world for the sake of the world? Well, he does it, like we've talked about, two ways. And we're talking about what does it mean to be this knight who is a Christian moral person who's keeping the forces of the world at bay so the gospel can be proclaimed freely to anyone who will hear. And and that picture is the picture I want to burn in your minds. That's the picture of this left-hand kingdom work, of keeping some of these forces of chaos at bay. All right, we talked about this yesterday, the dynamic differentiating mindset, the Reformation restraint mindset, the vocational respect mindset, because we believe God is preserving the world even through non-Christians. That's a hard thing to get your arms around. That means if a mom and dad are doing a good job of raising their kids and they happen to be non-Christian, God is at work through them, but not to save the world, to do what? To preserve it. You have to struggle with some of these things. Give to Caesar. Why? Man, Caesar was crazy. How about this one? Cyrus the Persian in the Old Testament, God's anointed. As far as I know, he wasn't associated at all with the promised people. I don't even know if he was a believer, but somehow that statement of how God was using him, he was probably a left-hand kingdom leader who did some things that God really wanted done. All right? So we talked about this. Start to understand, try to figure out what this means. And by the way, in dynamic differentiation, when you get involved in some of these discussions, you're going to get involved in some discussions where you've got two evils. Like there's no good. And so what do Lutherans do there? We usually go with the lesser of two evils and still go to church and pray about it and say, please forgive me. So when the policemen, I've had to deal with police all the time who are the last bastion against chaos, and then they had to kill somebody, and they said, Pastor, I know it was the right thing to do as a policeman, but I can't live with it. And my point is you're right. Even though that was the right thing to do, because if you wouldn't have stopped that person, there would have been more chaos. Look what happened with that cop that wouldn't go into the school in Florida. He just stood out there and waited. Well, that's not what police are supposed to do. They're supposed to run in there and prevent more chaos, right? He didn't do that. Well, if you do that, you still got to live with the fact that you killed that person. That's why I said, lesser of two evils. You had to do something, and now please come to church where you can be forgiven too. Only Lutherans talk that way. Same thing with abortion. You know, when they talk about aborting, the mom is going to die or the child's going to die, those are two evils. When you say one of them's good, now you're in a whole different moral universe than me. And so I can deal with the lesser of two evils sometimes. What I can't say is making evil good when I know it's not. Reformation restraint means, again, I got to honor God when how he does things through people, because he preserves the world through all these people, including sinners. In fact, he actually preserves the world by pitting people's pride and arrogance. He pits it against each other somehow, sometimes. So I just want to be faithful to that, and I want to bring a moral structure to that to the best of my ability. So become champions for liberty. We are salt and light. We have a preserving work and an enlightening work. And I'm amazed that God chooses broken sinners like us to do it. So don't get me wrong. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to sometimes charge in when you shouldn't have charged. You're going to sometimes wait when you should have charged in. Don't let it stop you from continually engaging the culture. And that means your kids, your grandkids, and all these things for their sake. If I could just impress on you one last thought. Do all this for whom? For the person in front of you, not for yourself. Jesus doesn't need us to protect his church. The gates of hell will not prevail against his church. So I'm sorry, I'm not really afraid of any government overwhelming us either. But there's a sense where as you move into these things, you will get overwhelmed. You will sometimes feel like there's no way this can, no, my point is try to be useful in Christ's hands for the person he brings into your life. Try to do all this kind of thinking about, is this a preserving thing or is this a saving thing? And then try to apply it to that person. And to the best of your ability, try to put things in the culture, protect everybody so that you can keep preaching and teaching and living for Jesus in your daily relationships. And if you do that, I'm just telling you, God will get his work done. He will get his work done because he always is active, even sometimes in spite of us. So salt and light, put your temporal liberties to work. Okay, so again, I've already gone through these things. This is what we do on the hill. That's me walking up to one of my days up there. I would just tell you, get to know us on the website, and eventually, if you can prayerfully be a part of this with us, we're going to try to resource you, try to give you all kinds of things to keep reading and sharing. We have a Champions for Liberty way of getting involved with this, and when it's all said and done, please help us be your voice in D.C., because we're fighting for you. God bless you.
Thank you.
And today is Constitution Day. Can you imagine?
I announced that before.
Did you?
Yeah,
okay.
17th,
Well, I just wanted to say again.
Yeah.
Can't say thank you enough to God. All right.
Well, it's supposed to be a question and answer time. So there's a couple microphones around. The envelopes?
Okay. Well, they're up here, and I'll bring them around. Do you want me to bring some to the tables and leave them on the tables too? I'll do that after we're done, okay? At lunch. So Q&As, if you got questions, let's use the mics, because that way we can hear you.
At the last convention of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, an amendment was added to the body's deliberation on immigration.
Yeah.
And the amendment included the statement, "We are a sanctuary church." I was wondering whether you'd like to comment on that in the light of your talking about us being able to differentiate. I do not say this with any animosity towards the ELCA.
And Pastor, you can jump in after me. I just wrote on something like this because there was another law where some people left food and water out for people, and they're now being charged with felonies, okay? And so someone wrote me and says, "What's your opinion on this?" I mean, they're just trying to help people. So I'm trying to, again, people are saying, come up with one answer that solves all these questions. And here's my best answer. If you're going to get involved in this issue, you should do more than the law allows, not less. And so when someone says we're going to be a sanctuary city, or a sanctuary church, they're doing less than the law allows. I mean, you should honor the laws of the land that you're in if you're a Christian. If I was in France, I would honor France's laws. If I was in Mexico, I'd honor Mexico's laws. Now, if I want to say, but that there seems to be some unkindness in those laws, law is never going to be totally kind. So maybe I get involved in people's lives. So if that person wanted to do the water and the food, here's what I would have advocated. I would have said, give them water and food. If you see someone dying and you don't help them, that's your problem. You got to do something. But then once they're healed, you take them where they belong. You take them to the magistrates. So even the Good Samaritan, when he saw the guy laying on the side of the road, he bound him, brought him to the person, and he paid the cost. My biggest problem with the sanctuary people is that they want to open everybody's door to everybody, but they want to take no responsibility for any of that. So my argument to them is, if you will leave your front door open constantly, if you will leave the keys in your car constantly, leave your refrigerator open constantly to anybody who comes in, then I'll engage that kind of conversation with you. And so I would say, if you're going to do that, and I can see compelling moments where you say, I've got to help this person, I don't care what the law says, then do more than the law demands, not less. That's the only way I think I can answer it in such a way, because there's all myriads of situations where some people might say, well, now they're coming in and taking all my stuff. Well, what does that say, Pastor? You helped them. I got that issue too. More than the law demands, not less. I think that would be the Christian way to engage that issue.
I think it's, I can understand politicians who are government officials breaking the law. I thought about voting, and I thought about putting politics aside. How can my Christian faith impact how I'm going to vote? There's three things. First of all, I don't believe in abortion. Therefore, I can't vote for anybody who supports abortion on demand. Secondly, I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. I can't vote for anybody who believes otherwise. And I can't vote for people who break the law. And I think people who have sanctuary cities, if it were up to me, their butt would be in jail so fast their head would spin. Anything else?
I was merely pointing out that there might be that situation where the guy is saying, I'm starving to death, help me. But my point is the same as what Pastor's saying, that if you empower breaking the law, then you're going to get more what? Breaking the law, which then sends us into chaos. And right now, my wife served for a year down at the Texas border. She was teaching down at the University of Texas. It's now called In the Valley. And she saw this stuff. With impunity, they were breaking our laws. And our own government was actually empowering the breaking of our laws. And so the point was, well, why are we doing this? These, average people's lives are being transformed by this stuff. Do more than the law demands, not less.
Anything else?
One comment. I think part of the problem is, as Christians, we're unable to, or we don't differentiate between how I love my neighbor and yet at the same time how I allow or expect my government to do what they're supposed to do.
Can I give you a time in my ministry where I screwed it all up? One time a guy was trying to commit suicide. He had a gun and he was going to shoot himself. And of course he called the pastor. The wife called the pastor and said, would you come? And what did I do as Superman? I went right over there. And my wife was so mad at me. She said, why did you do that? The job of the policeman was the job of defusing the situation. And then your job would have been, if they went to jail or went to the hospital, you follow them there. But as a pastor, I was too busy. I can do everything, right? And God has vocations. Because that guy could have turned a gun on me very easily. You said, what? Bam. And then I would have been out of it. So my point is we got to start to learn to honor how God does certain things for certain ways. And we got to sometimes stand back, reformation restraint, and say, And again, that's a very aggressive thing that says we're going to disobey the law. That's just not who we are.
I'd like to just say something. I feel very conflicted. I don't want to sound hard-hearted. I feel sorry for the people. I'm so happy I live here, and I know if I lived in Mexico or down in El Salvador, I'd probably want to come to the United States too.
Sure.
I really would. And so we have to obey the law, and there's a lot of other things that go with it. Are they taking away other people's jobs and so on and so forth? So I really pray about things like that. I'm really feel sorry for these people, and I don't mean to sound mean about it. So it's really a difficult situation.
And I served in a ministry that had half of the people that were becoming pastors were from other countries. So I dealt with green cards, dealt with all these different issues. What bothered me most is that 1 million people were coming in legally and lots of other people coming in illegally, and they were actually stepping in front of their line too. So, that's what the government's job is. The government's job is to protect our borders. The government's job is to be humane with that. If you want to get involved in people's lives, then I say you better get involved in their life and all that means. And you can't make a law to just say it'll go away. Anyway, enough said on that. I think there can be all kinds of discussions on that.
Anything else?
Any other questions?
Wow.
Holy cow. Oh, there's one in the back.
There's one back there. Vince back there.
No, use the mic. That way everybody can hear. That's a new law.
Okay, still related to immigration, we've got the wall issue. Build a wall on the border. How do you answer the argument? How can we build a wall if we're a Christian country? If there was a wall between Israel and Egypt, and the baby Joseph couldn't take Mary and the baby Jesus across into Egypt, and he would have been killed by Jesus would have been killed by Herod's edict that all the baby boys were to be killed.
We have visitor visas. I don't understand. I don't see the wall issue. To me, do you have a right to have a border or not? Do you honor people's border? Do you honor property lines? It's the same issue to me. If you put up a fence, are you immoral? Or are you not a Christian if you put up a fence in your backyard? That's why I said, if you want to, I try to put these things on the average people's line. If you're an open borders person, then you have to be an open house person. And since most of these people live in closed houses behind guarded doors, then I'm just like, well, I don't know how I'm supposed to talk to you. I know some people who open their house to everybody, so I listen to them. That's a real argument, okay? Now, I lived in places where walls keep bad guys out. Now, when you have a wall that's keeping good guys in, that's a bad wall. That was the wall in Berlin. People are running for their lives to get out. I think we should knock that wall down. But a wall that protects, just so that we can regulate immigration so people can come in a God-pleasing, non-chaotic way, I don't know how that's any less Christian or more Christian. It just seems like a pretty good policy. Again, when you get into these things, people make these arguments about what would have happened to Jesus. We're the most generous country when it comes to visas. We're the most generous country in the world. Name another country that is as open to other people as we are. There isn't one. So, one last thing about this. When you start comparing these arguments, most of the people that you're going to be arguing with come from a progressive mindset, and they believe in utopia. So they're always comparing your view to utopia. Here's what you should be doing. Compared to this country, compared to that country. Compare it to something real. Because you're going to find that when this is the only country that brings in 1 million, plus another 1 million, 2 million, illegally, 3 million a year, blah, 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 and tries to do it in a humane fashion. Name me another country. I'm happy to have that. And Sweden, by the way, is pushing people out right now. So don't give me Sweden anymore. I'm tired of that. And Sweden's becoming actually a command economy again.
Question here.
So our Synod president described the Missouri Synod as perceived as quietistic in a statement a number of years ago. And I just come from 44 years of ministry where I could attest to that quietism in parish life again and again. And I read with interest this one statement in your paper, Dr. Seltz, that said, Christians boldly proclaim the gospel and humbly apply the law. Mm-hmm. And I think we get that exactly backwards as Lutheran Christians, that we boldly proclaim the law and humbly apply the gospel to sort of go hand in hand with our quietism. I've been listening intently for practical application. And the one thing that I heard was kind of a foundation is that we can go and pray. And pray for a year. I'm looking for first story stuff. Okay, we're going to build the basement of prayer. That's important. What next?
Well, but the basement's not just the basement of prayer. The basement's moral engagement and fundamental issues. I think I already talked about if you've got laws that are laws that are denying the preeminence of a father and mother over the authority over their children, that's a bad law, and you need to fight that back. Legislation, writing your congressman, those kind of things. But to me, I'm just trying to say what you're doing there is putting a basement in. As long as you understand that's what you're doing, because a lot of people think if we get that law in place, then everything's going to be great. No, it's just going to be a better basement floor.
Spiritually and actively as Christians, I'm saying that prayer is the basis. The prayer is the foundation for everything.
Yeah.
I'm looking for more not more, the next layer, the next story of practical application for we as God's people. What do we do? It's a do I'm looking for.
Well, in
From both of
left-hand kingdom stuff now, right? Because that's what I've been talking about. Well, that's what I said. Then once you've established and developed a heart of being a public person for the sake of the public, not for the sake of yourself or the church, then you're going to see situations that arise that start compromising ethical, moral things that you know are bad for all of us. Well, then you get involved in those kind of things. Mostly at the grassroots level. The other thing you can do, which I didn't talk at all about, is you can start forming what I call public entities that are not political at all. And this is where the church used to be known for. We used to start the boys club, the girls club, the YMCA, the YWCA, all those different things. That was all started by compulsion of faithful people. They didn't go to the government and say, please form for us a group of people who will take care of this. Well, the trouble is all that stuff's been regulated out of business or regulated to death. We formed clinics. We formed all kinds of stuff. We formed hospitals. We did all that. Well, now we're assuming the government's going to do all that for us. Well, I'd say get back to doing that kind of stuff. Start small with something you see as a need in your neighborhood. Talk to other churches and say, can we address this together? And that's what we did in New York. We did stuff for the kids. We did stuff, after school training. We did all these kind of things. The problem is we're running into regulatory government and all those things before we can even get started. And so we're pushing back on that so that we can start doing these public things together again. So advocate for laws that you know are fundamental to our civility. Advocate and start organizing things together that maybe will bless the community. Those kinds of things. That's what churches should be about. But right now, most people are looking to the government to do all that. And then when we do start doing it, we get regulated to death, which means we don't do it. And I think that's where we're at right now. That is the situation we find ourselves right now. Because we've got pro-life clinics, we've got pro-life adoption agencies, we've got pro-life things that are, and pro-society things for boys and girls, and after-school all those things are being regulated to death. And some of them are being put out of business.
I understand your question is that what can we do beyond just praying, right? Well, I think that why don't we get involved in politics? Why don't you run for office in your community?
That too.
What about talking about schools? You talked about schools and what they're teaching today. What about going to PTA meetings? What about running for the Board of Education? Get in there, and you can let your opinions be known there. What's the matter?
So that's great. I mean, there's lots of things like that. I didn't even say run for office, and I should have. Yeah, thanks, Pastor. Pete, but again, let's say you do all of that, and this is where people struggle. You still put a basement floor in. I just want to make sure you know what you're doing. But right now, there are people actually getting rid of the basement floor, and we can't let that happen. Anything else?
There's one there. Two or
our answer actually got more questions.
Okay, along the same lines, I feel very unprepared to be able to do that.
Okay.
Are we preparing our young pastors to be able to deal with this, or who is the leader to be able to do this?
I am. No, I'm saying that. I mean, I've been tasked to do this. Now, I'm not going to be the one that gets it done. In fact, I assume by the time I'm done with my first initial work, 15 years from now, there'll be some superstar that'll come in and really take it to another level, and you probably remember him. That's fine. This is the ground floor of this. We have never done this kind of thing, but the situation is such that you can't do it ad hoc like Walter Meyer did. You actually have to prepare people for this because it's become that definitive. And so we're going to train 300 kids of other vocations. We're going to tell pastors about this, but the minute the pastor gets involved in too much of this stuff, he gets politicized. There's a pastor named Chris Thomas doing a really good job of this up in Michigan, and he gets attacked for this all the time, and he's really doing an excellent job of differentiating. He really is one of the best I've seen out there. And so we're going to train pastors for that, but it's going to be the lay folks of all vocations who really do this left-hand kingdom work. That's what's going to keep it. It's kind of like the chaplain in the military. We got a lot of chaplains. So think of it this way. The chaplains in the military, what's their job? Preach, teach the gospel, right? Share the Bible, lead services, counsels. When they go into battle, and they go into battle with their groups, they don't carry a gun. That's what I'm saying. So the pastor, we want to make sure that the pastor is uniquely differentiated from the power of the state, but he might be right in the mix with all the fighting. Now, of course, they do have sign a guy with an M16 to follow him around. But if you see how we do our chaplaincy, and keep that tension there, I mean, in some sense, you want to have your pastor and your lay people in that similar tension, because pastor's job is ultimately to do what? Preach and teach the law and gospel so that you might know Jesus as your Savior. And the lay people's job is to keep the society stuff at bay or to engage the society stuff with him so that that gospel can be preached.
How large is your team?
Welcome to the team. Gets bigger every day. I've got 3 people right now that are part-time, but we just signed this agreement with Concordia, Nebraska that'll expand our capacity. We should have a full-time person to head that up, but that'll be paid for ultimately by their association with Nebraska once we get the curriculum written. So if you know anybody who really believes in this, I can help us get that written. After that, we'll probably hire another person to come out to do this kind of stuff with the church, and then I'll start working harder in D.C. And we got 3 other people on staff.
Our church loves to do, we love to do projects out in the community. Mm-hmm. We have an area, it's called Our Center. The churches have gotten together. We serve homeless people a meal, cook it, provide all the stuff. The one thing we have been told is we don't tell them that we're from Christ Our Savior Lutheran Church. Well, if we're going to be doing some of those kind of things, wouldn't you think you'd advertise your church and let people know that it's through the love and the caring of the people of this church? Why would we not want to use that as a way of letting them know where we are and what we do?
Well, it can be perceived as PR, but here's what I would do. When we ran a marathon and we put Isaiah 40 on the back. Those who rise up on wings like eagles. And people were really blessed by it. They really were. And we just put LHM.org on the bottom. They didn't have any idea who LHM was. If they wanted to know more about who wrote this Bible verse, then they found a place to do it. And that, to me, seems to be more of a servant way of saying it. So find a website link that actually, maybe says a little bit more about your heart. Put that on there. And then put a Bible verse and maybe something like that on the bottom. And if someone says, man, we just really love you people, why would you do this? Well, just say, just go click on that and see what you think of us.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Was there somebody up here? There's a man up here, or somebody? There's another man, okay.
I have so many questions, I don't know which one to ask, but one that is really easily answered is this whole program you have registered as a 501c3.
Yeah, we're a 501c3, not a 501c4.
Okay.
501c4 is a lobby group.
So it's a tax exempt.
Everything is tax. We're a tax deductible, tax exempt organization. And like I said, when I go talk to congressmen, I do not talk about particular policies. No. I talk about our fundamental teachings and beliefs, talk about our schools and our churches and why I think that they need to be attending to what we think is important. And then I try to undergird those who are fighting that good fight by being a spiritual resource. But I'm not a politician, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a lobbyist.
The reason I ask that question is I would virtually say 100% of us can give through a qualified charitable deduction.
Absolutely.
In place of a taxable IRA distribution.
Yeah. We're not there yet, but yes, you can.
But if you don't know what that's about, come and see me afterwards, because I use QCDs, qualified charitable distributions from your IRA.
Well, listen, I appreciate it, because like I said before, and I know it's a bit of a pitch, but I don't exist if you guys don't give. I mean, because I'm not in a budget. The church raised money to launch us, but Pete used to be one of my church planters. And I think it's a really good thing to get a church planter, give them seed money for a couple of years, but then launch them. And if the church says after 2 years, we don't want you there, chances are either that church's got a problem or that leader's got a problem. And so there's a sense where I'm doing this now by the grace of God, and we're going to see whether the church wants to go forward with this going into the future. We got 3,500 donors right now. We need 5,000 to be kind of fundamentally secure. And then we need a couple of big programs that the church really believes in, and I think we just nailed one. Okay, and this is only our second year. And then on top of that, we're in the most expensive place in the world to live. So, But we're actually worked on that because when I was in New York, we lived where we worked, and that way we used one building to really build what we were doing. And we're doing that same similar strategy, which allows us to do more with your money than we would have if I lived over here and we officed in D.C. So we're doing everything we can to do everything as best that we can. And by the way, I'm going to tell you this is a little preview of what's to come. We get this thing started with Concordia, Nebraska. They're going to have and again, I'm not sure what the title is going to be, the Madison Liberty Center. It could be titled something else. But for now, for lack of a better, there'll be a Madison Liberty Center at Nebraska. There'll also be one in D.C. Well, we're working with a church. There's only one Lutheran church, LCMS church in D.C. right now, and they've got a 4-story brownstone next door that's fallen apart. But it's huge. And so I'm going to a donor right after this. I'm going to a donor that gave a building to another ministry, D. James Kennedy's ministry. He is an LCMS guy who bought that building for their ministry. And I'm going to pitch to him that he should rehab that building so we can put our offices in there and that we can also do some work with the church. And I'm going to donate my time as an evangelist to the church.
Okay.
Any other
second
questions
question.
here? There's a man up here who's been raising his hand for the last 2 hours. No?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a statement that, what happens is that the government starts taking over everything by default because the Protestant churches around the country are so busy beating each other up and not getting together and understanding the foe and the way of why people are the way they are, then the schools and everything like that. Pretty soon you forget about it. What do you think about getting involved way down the line on the long game of, how you're going to do that with all the crazy lobbyists and everything going on?
Pastor, you want to jump in on that? You want to take that?
I don't know. I'm trying to understand exactly what you're asking.
Well,
me.
should it be just a Lutheran thing, or should it be more evangelical? Well, not evangelical, but any other branches of, the Presbyterians and Episcopalians and etc. Way down the line.
How they can cooperate together and stuff, you mean?
Yeah, cooperation. Yeah.
Well, I hate to say this, but a lot of churches approve of abortion and gay marriage. Or the Lutheran Synod approves of it. That's one of the problems in the church today. I think half of Christendom may not even be real Christians, according to. And I just got an email, I think a week ago, where at the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, there's a lot of people advocating universalism. And I was so happy to hear some of the lay people quoting John 14:6.
No one comes to the Father.
No one can come to the Father but by me. So when a church becomes that radical, how can we cooperate with them when we don't agree?
Now, in D.C., I will just tell you that the fight that we're talking about with liberty and life and those things, I work regularly with the Catholic bishops. I work regularly with the ERLC, which is the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. Work with ADF. And by the way, those lawyers that are working for us, they come to me and say, but we need the stories of the church. So they said, we've got the argument, Pastor. What we don't have is the stories, and we're getting beat by the stories. And so I'll give you an example. There's a guy that's now a pastor in the Lutheran Church who's been he's practiced the homosexual lifestyle all of his life. He came to faith in Jesus through this one gal, and now he's married and he's living a different life. And so when AB 2943 hit in California, the conversion therapy law and all that, he went to Sacramento and said, here I am. And so we've actually had him. He's actually been working. He's now a pastor in San Diego. He's got lots of gay folks coming to him. He's not one of these radicals on the street corner saying, down with this, down with that. But people hear about his life, and he's drawing people to himself. But he would have been put out of business and made illegal if that law would have passed. So again, we're saying, here's a guy, here's some stories, here's some challenges. And so we're undergirding that, and we're working with lots of people to do this. But I want to say one thing, because there's one spirit to that question I just want to make sure is not what you meant. There's a lot of stuff going on in our cities all across America that are only because people of faith are there working. And as I said, I'll get you this book and I'll give it to Pastor. But they did a study that if all the non-for-profits from Philadelphia, I think it was Philadelphia, were removed, that the economy would collapse in the city. because there were so many faith-based people just doing things. They were not being paid very well. They were working long hours, but they felt that this had to be done. And so this idea that the church isn't doing something is a caricature. And I just say, I'm not saying we're doing everything right, and we shouldn't participate with each other, but I want to make sure you understand that's also the way we're kind of caricatured so that we'll stop fighting and stop serving. And I'm just saying, serve. Don't worry about it.
I guess our time's about, there's another, we got some more questions.
One,
though.
two, and then we'll be done. 1, 2. But you?
Already.
Oh, he has the mic already. Okay, then 1, 2, 3, and that's it.
He's the boss.
Please,
It was on.
please notice I'm leaning against the post, my old age. As a brother, I would like to say this. We are figuratively on a train ride through a tunnel.
Okay.
The conductor has told us not to traverse between trains because we'll be infected by the fumes. Inadvertently, some of the passengers do the opposite of what the conductor said. We, as Christians, know there's a light at that end of the tunnel. Let's keep that in mind. God will see us through this, and let's don't lose our focus on heaven.
Okay.
Thank you. The government is putting blinders on us. Let's work through it and around it if possible.
I agree.
Thank you.
Wait for the microphone. Wait for the microphone.
You can hear me.
No, there it is.
Now we'll hear you better.
Anyway, I am so glad that you're in your position, but I miss you on the Lutheran Hour.
I miss being there.
And I'm grateful that you were here today and yesterday. Thank God for you.
Thank you. I miss the Lutheran Hour too.
Is there one more?
One more. There we
One
go,
more.
Pete.
So, Dr. Seltz, did I hear you correctly?
No.
That one of the things that we can do is to support the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty
Absolutely.
financially.
Absolutely. And let me just close. Pastor, can I say, and then maybe you can close us up. But I just want to tell you how grateful I am that you've allowed me to come back. This work in D.C. Was a bit of a step away from things for me, and I had to struggle with that. But I believe in our church. And I know there's a lot of people who say, well, our church is this and our church is that. I really do believe in our church. When I spoke to you as Lutheran Hour speaker, I used to always say, remember that 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Think of what you were before you were called, and I paraphrase, none of you were any big deal. That's the paraphrase. But God chose you. God became your righteousness, your sanctification, your holiness. So let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. Well, my point to talk about all this stuff was I'm going to fight to make sure that you have the public opportunity to keep boasting in Jesus. There are some people trying to shut that opportunity down. We're fighting that back. I think it's a good thing to do. But I've never lost sight of the fact of why we're doing it. We're doing it so we can keep preaching this good news, keep serving it into people's lives. So thank you for having me back. Thank you for honoring me and saying you're still supporting me in this, because I know Lutheran Hour and the proclamation of the gospel is the ultimate thing. But this is a penultimate thing that has to be done. So I'm happy to do it for you and with you. God bless you.
You didn't hear the announcement about the closing worship service we have today.
Okay.
And there's going to be an offering. As I told them, it couldn't be a Lutheran service without an offering. And all the offering is going to go to your organization.
Oh, thank you, Pastor. Thank you. Appreciate it a lot.
Yeah.
All right.
I still love you.